My wife's silent treatment crushed me at first, but my 10-day rebirth turned her game into the harsh reality she never expected to face finally. Around our home as if I were invisible. Not a glance, not a word, nothing. "Are you ignoring me?" I asked directly, my voice cutting through the artificial silence. No response. She continued scrolling through her phone, then walked past me to refill her coffee cup, her shoulder deliberately avoiding contact with mine. This wasn't our first argument, but this silent treatment was new. I reached for her arm, not roughly, but firmly enough to demand attention. "Whatever I did, we should talk about it like adults." She pulled away and walked into our bedroom, closing the door with a decisive click. No slam, no drama. Almost worse because it felt so calculated. That night marked day 3 of being treated like a ghost in my own home. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to her measured breathing beside me, close enough to touch but separated by an invisible wall. My mind raced through possible offenses, forgotten anniversary, missed signals about something important to her, or maybe something at work had spilled over into home life. By morning I'd made a decision. I wouldn't beg for explanation or attention. I wouldn't become desperate or pathetic. Looking at my reflection while brushing my teeth, I hardly recognized the man staring back. Tired eyes, slumped shoulders, the beginning of defeat creeping into my expression. 10 days, I muttered to myself. If she wants to play this game, I'll give it 10 days. But she won't recognize the man standing here when those days are up. Day 4 brought more of the same. I attempted normal conversation over breakfast. Weather's supposed to be good this weekend. Nothing. "Your mother called yesterday." Silence. The neighbor's dog was barking all night. She acted as if the chair across from her was empty. I left for work with a strange calm settling over me. This wasn't about apologizing for unknown transgressions anymore. This was about transformation. During my lunch break, I made 3 appointments: barber, personal trainer, and with a career counselor I'd been putting off contacting. On the drive home, I stopped at a high-end men's clothing store I normally would consider too expensive. Walking through our front door that evening, I carried more than shopping bags. I carried the first pieces of a new identity. She was in the kitchen chopping vegetables with mechanical precision. I placed my keys on the counter loudly enough to announce my presence, but didn't seek acknowledgement. Instead, I walked straight to the spare bedroom we used as an office and closed the door. For the next 2 hours, I created a detailed plan, not to win back her attention, but to reclaim mine. Each day would bring a new change, each one building toward the man I'd always wanted to become, but had somehow lost along the way. When had I become so predictable, so dependent on her validation? When had I started dimming my own light to avoid outshining hers? The questions flowed, and with them came clarity. Later, I heard her open the office door. I could feel her presence behind me, likely curious about my unusual behavior. Normally, I would have turned eagerly, grateful for any acknowledgement. Instead, I continued writing, ignoring her just as thoroughly as she'd been ignoring me. After a long moment, she closed the door. A small smile crossed my face. Day 1 of my transformation was already working. In bed that night, I turned away from her empty side. She'd chosen to sleep on the couch. 10 changes in 10 days. By the time this ridiculous silent treatment ended, she wouldn't be ignoring the same man she started ignoring. She'd be faced with someone new, someone who commanded attention rather than begged for it. The alarm clock read 11:47 p.m., nearly midnight. I closed my eyes, oddly excited for morning to arrive. "Let the games begin," I whispered to the darkness. Day 5 of her silence would be day 1 of my rebirth, and unlike her silent treatment, my transformation would be impossible to ignore. The alarm blared at 5 a.m., 2 hours earlier than my usual wake-up time. The couch was empty. She must have slipped into our bedroom sometime during the night. I moved quietly, not out of consideration, but to maintain the element of surprise for the day ahead. Change number 1, complete physical transformation. I drove to a 24-hour gym across town where nobody knew me. The facility was nearly empty at that hour, just a few dedicated bodybuilders and early risers. The personal trainer I'd hired, a former military man with a no-excuses attitude, was waiting. "You look like you've been comfortable for too long," he observed bluntly, circling me with evaluating eyes. "We're going to fix that." The next hour was brutal. Muscles I'd forgotten existed screamed in protest. By the end, sweat had soaked through my shirt. But looking in the mirror, I already stood straighter. Pain had a clarifying effect. "Same time tomorrow," the trainer said. It wasn't a question. Back home, I slipped into the bathroom before she was awake. The hot shower was reward and preparation combined. After drying off, I opened the shopping bag from yesterday. The high-end shaving kit, premium cologne, and styling products were investments in the new me. Change number 2, appearance upgrade. When I emerged from the steamy bathroom, she was making coffee in the kitchen. Her eyes widened slightly, the first real reaction in days. Taking in my freshly styled hair and the scent of unfamiliar cologne, I walked past without acknowledgement, selecting one of my new outfits from the closet. The charcoal suit was a significant departure from my usual business casual attire. Paired with a crisp white shirt and bold tie, it transformed my silhouette into something sharper, more commanding. The shoes, Italian leather that cost more than I'd care to admit, completed the effect. Her coffee cup paused midway to her lips when I walked through the kitchen. The flash of surprise in her eyes was quickly suppressed, but I'd caught it. I grabbed an apple, packed a protein shake, and left without attempting conversation. At work, the effect was immediate. The receptionist did a double take. My boss paused mid-sentence during our morning meeting, momentarily thrown by my transformed appearance. Female colleagues found excuses to stop by my office. Client meeting? One asked. No, I replied with a slight smile. Just felt like a change. Change number 3, workplace dominance. During the team meeting, I spoke up about the project that had been floundering for weeks. Instead of my usual approach of suggesting ideas tentatively, I laid out a comprehensive solution with confidence. This stops now, I stated, standing to claim the room's attention. We've been circling the same problems for too long. Here's what we're going to do. The silence after my presentation was telling. My boss recovered first. That's remarkably thorough, he admitted. Let's implement this starting today. On my lunch break, I didn't meet with my usual group. Instead, I took myself to an upscale restaurant near the office and requested a table for one. The hostess, a stunning woman with intelligent eyes, gave me an appreciative glance as she led me to my seat. I ordered confidently, made eye contact with the staff, and enjoyed the meal without hiding behind a phone screen. The man who left the restaurant was not the same one who had entered. I felt it in the way others were now seeing me. Change number 4, independent social life. That evening, instead of heading straight home, I texted an old college friend I'd lost touch with. He responded immediately, surprised but enthusiastic about grabbing drinks. We met at an upscale bar I'd never visited before. You look different, he remarked, studying me over his whiskey glass. Good different. We spent 2 hours catching up. He introduced me to several people in his circle, including a business contact that could prove valuable in the future. When I mentioned my situation at home without self-pity, just stating facts, he nodded with understanding. She's testing your strength, he said simply. Most men fail this test by becoming desperate. You're doing the opposite, smart. I arrived home late, keys jingling deliberately as I entered. She was in the living room, pretending to read but clearly waiting up. I hung my jacket carefully and walked to the kitchen, feeling her eyes following me. Had a great night, I announced to the empty kitchen, voice carrying just enough to reach her. Going to be doing that more often. No response came, but I wasn't expecting one. Day 5 of her silence was ending, but my transformation was just beginning. In the mirror above the kitchen sink, a different man looked back at me. Confident, purposeful, with a glint of amusement in his eyes. As I prepared for bed, I caught her watching me from the doorway. For a moment I thought she might break her silence, but she turned away when our eyes met. Sleep well, I said casually, climbing into bed with a book I'd been meaning to read for months. Big day tomorrow. It wasn't said for her benefit. Tomorrow would indeed be significant. The next phase of my 10-day metamorphosis was already planned, and each change would build on the foundation laid today. Her silent treatment had given me an unexpected gift, the freedom to reinvent myself without explanation or permission. And I was just getting started. Morning 6 arrived with the familiar ache of yesterday's workout, a welcome reminder of progress. This time, I didn't attempt to be quiet. I played music while getting ready, my movements deliberate and unhurried. Through the bathroom mirror, I caught her watching from the bedroom, quickly averting her eyes when I turned. Change number 5, reclaiming abandoned passions. After my morning workout and before heading to the office, I made a detour to a music store downtown. Years ago, before we were married, playing guitar had been more than a hobby. It was part of my identity. Somewhere along the way, the instrument had been relegated to gathering dust in our storage closet, my creative outlet sacrificed to domestic routine. The shop owner, a gray-haired man with calloused fingertips, nodded appreciatively when I selected a premium acoustic guitar. Getting back into it? He asked, tuning the instrument before handing it to me. Never should have stopped, I replied, feeling the familiar weight against my body as I played a few chords. The muscle memory remained even after years of neglect. I arranged for weekly lessons and purchased the guitar along with a small amplifier. The investment wasn't just financial, it was reclaiming a piece of myself I'd surrendered without resistance. At work, I continued my new pattern of assertiveness. When the marketing director attempted to dismiss my team's proposal without proper consideration, I held my ground. "We're not moving on until you've given this the attention it deserves," I stated, my voice calm but unyielding. The room fell silent. In the past, I would have backed down immediately. The director looked startled, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Walk me through it again." By lunch, word had spread about my confrontation. The respect in my colleagues' eyes was unmistakable. My phone buzzed with a text from a female coworker I'd always been friendly with. "Whatever's gotten into you lately, keep it coming. Drinks after work?" I accepted the invitation. Not out of interest, I wasn't looking to complicate my home situation further, but because the old me would have declined out of some misplaced sense of obligation to rush home to an empty evening. Change number 6, controlling my time completely. I texted home working late. "Don't wait up. No apologies, no explanations. Just information." The power of not seeking permission was intoxicating. Drinks with colleagues turned into dinner when more people joined. I found myself at the center of conversation, sharing ideas and stories with an ease I hadn't felt in years. When had I become so careful with my words, so worried about taking up space? "You should come to the industry mixer next week," suggested a senior manager from another department. "With your new project direction, you should be connecting with the right people." I accepted immediately, keenly aware that such networking had always intimidated me before. The old me would have found an excuse to avoid it. Arriving home after 11 p.m., I found the house dark except for a single lamp in the living room. She was curled on the couch, pretending to be absorbed in a show, but clearly waiting. I placed my new guitar prominently in the corner of the living room. Learning this again, I announced to the room, not directly to her. Forgot how much I loved it. No verbal response came, but I didn't miss how her eyes followed me as I poured a nightcap and took a seat at the other end of the couch, close enough to acknowledge her presence, but making no effort to bridge the emotional distance. Change number 7, physical space reformation. The next morning, day 7 of her silence, I woke early again and drove to a storage facility I'd rented the previous day. There, I spent 2 hours selecting furniture and personal items I'd kept from before our marriage, items that reflected my tastes rather than our compromised aesthetic. When I returned home that afternoon, I began rearranging my home office without discussion or permission. Out went the bland, functional desk we'd purchased together, and in came my old drafting table that had character and history. I hung artwork that had meaning to me, set up my guitar stand prominently, and created a space that reflected the man I was rediscovering. The sound of her footsteps, pausing outside the door, told me she'd noticed the delivery truck. When she finally pushed the door open, her sharp intake of breath was audible. I continued unpacking, not acknowledging her presence. After a long moment, she walked away. But I heard her on the phone in the bedroom, her voice too low to make out words, testing my resolve, seeking support from a friend. It didn't matter. My transformation wasn't contingent on her reaction. That evening, I cooked myself a complex meal I'd always wanted to try, filling the kitchen with unfamiliar spices and the sound of a cooking video playing from my tablet. I set a single place at the table, poured a glass of expensive wine, and enjoyed every bite without offering to share. The silent treatment continued, but the power dynamic had unmistakably shifted. In the charged quiet of our home, one thing was becoming increasingly clear: her silence was no longer controlling me. In fact, with each passing day, her refusal to communicate was diminishing her influence rather than asserting it. Day 7 was ending, and I was halfway through my 10-day plan. The man in the mirror now stood taller, spoke with more authority, and, most importantly, looked himself in the eye without flinching. 3 more changes were coming, each more significant than the last. If she thought ignoring me would bring me to my knees, she was about to discover just how wrong she'd been. The countdown to day 10 had begun in earnest. Day 8 began with the now familiar early alarm. The soreness in my muscles had evolved from complaint to conversation, my body responding to the demands I was placing on it. After my workout, I stopped at the barber shop I'd researched online. Not my usual chain haircut place, but an upscale men's grooming establishment. Change number 8, complete style reinvention. Something completely different, I told the barber, a tattooed man with impeccable style. I've been hiding behind the same look for years. He studied my face with professional assessment. You've got good bone structure that your current cut doesn't highlight. Let's fix that. 45 minutes later, I barely recognized myself. The conservative cut had been replaced with something modern and distinct. shorter on the sides with texture on top that the barber showed me how to style. He'd also shaped my previously neglected beard into something intentional and sharp. "This is who you should have been all along," he said, turning the chair so I could see the full effect. Looking in the mirror, I silently agreed. The transformation wasn't just physical. The man looking back at me carried himself differently, expected more, accepted less. At the office, the reactions were immediate. The receptionist actually dropped her pen. My team members exchanged glances. My boss did a double take during our morning briefing. "Didn't recognize you for a second there," he commented. "The new look suits you." The meeting turned to the project I'd taken charge of earlier in the week. The preliminary results were already showing improvement, and I presented them with confidence born of preparation and newfound self-assurance. "I'd like to lead the presentation to the executive team next week," I stated rather than asked. In the past, I would have waited to be offered the opportunity, if it came at all. My boss studied me for a moment, then nodded. "It's your project now. Make us look good." Change number 9, career acceleration. During lunch, I contacted a headhunter who'd reached out months ago. A call I'd never returned out of some misplaced loyalty to my comfortable position. The conversation was direct and productive. I wasn't actively looking to leave, but I wanted to understand my market value. We arranged a meeting for later in the week. That afternoon, the department VP stopped by my office, an unprecedented event. "Heard about your work on the Miller project," he said, leaning against my doorframe. "Also heard you stood up to marketing. About time someone did." He paused, seeming to reassess me. "There's a leadership position opening up next quarter. You weren't on my radar before. You are now." I thanked him without appearing overeager, maintaining the composed confidence that was becoming my new normal. Inside, though, I recognized the opportunity for what it was, the direct result of my transformation. After work, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I visited a high-end men's boutique and invested in a complete wardrobe overhaul. Clothes that fit perfectly, expressed confidence, and represented the man I was becoming, rather than the man I'd allowed myself to be. The sales associate, a stylish woman with an expert eye, assembled combinations I would never have considered before. "Your wife is going to love these," she remarked as I approved the selections. "This isn't for her," I replied simply. "It's for me." When I finally arrived home, arms laden with shopping bags, she was in the kitchen preparing dinner. For the first time in 8 days, she made direct eye contact. Her expression was a mixture of confusion and something harder to identify: interest, concern, attraction. "We need to talk," she said, breaking her self-imposed silence at last. I looked at her calmly, deliberately set down my bags, and poured myself a glass of water before responding. "Now you want to talk," I observed, my tone neutral rather than accusatory. 8 days of silence and suddenly conversation is important again. She flushed slightly. "You've been acting strangely." "I've been improving," I corrected. "There's a difference. Is this because I've been distant? Some kind of punishment?" I laughed, genuinely amused by her misinterpretation. "This isn't about you. That's what you don't understand. For once, this is entirely about me." Her expression shifted toward irritation. "So, you're just going to keep up whatever this is?" "I'm going to continue becoming the best version of myself," I replied. "Whether that bothers you or not is secondary." She opened her mouth, then closed it again, clearly thrown by my lack of apology or explanation. The script she'd expected me to follow had been discarded. "Dinner's almost ready," she finally said, retreating to the safety of domesticity. "I've already eaten," I replied, picking up my bags and heading toward the bedroom to organize my new wardrobe. "But thank you." That night she tried again, approaching me as I read in bed. "Can we please talk about what's happening?" Her tone had softened, the edge of demand replaced with something closer to uncertainty. Change number 10, emotional recalibration. "We can talk," I agreed, setting down my book. "But first, I'd like to understand why you felt silently punishing me for over a week was appropriate adult behavior." She hadn't expected this, the calm confrontation, the pointed question. In the past, I would have gratefully accepted any crumb of attention, apologizing for unknown transgressions just to restore peace. "I needed space to think," she offered weakly. "Space requires communication," I countered. "Silence is manipulation." Her eyes widened slightly. This directness was foreign to our relationship dynamic. "I don't recognize you anymore," she said finally. I smiled slightly. "That makes 2 of us. The difference is, I like the man I'm becoming." She retreated again, this time physically leaving the room. The conversation had ended on my terms, not hers. Another first. Day 8 was ending with the power dynamic of our relationship fundamentally altered. Her silence had been broken not because I had begged or compromised, but because my transformation had made me impossible to ignore. 2 more days, 2 more changes to complete my 10-day transformation. The final pieces would cement not just a new appearance or schedule, but a completely new reality. As I turned out the light, I realized I was actually looking forward to her test ending on day 10. Not because I needed her attention, that dependency had been broken, but because I was curious to see how she would adapt to the man I had become. Day 9 arrived with a sense of anticipation. My transformation was no longer just a response to her silent treatment. It had taken on a momentum of its own. The man I was becoming felt more authentic than the one I'd been for years. The morning routine had solidified: early workout, proper grooming, professional attire that commanded respect. But today would bring the most dramatic changes yet. Change number 11, financial independence restructuring. My first stop after the gym was at a private bank I'd researched thoroughly. For years, we had maintained joint accounts with my paycheck, essentially funding our lifestyle while her income supplemented. The arrangement had made sense initially, but had gradually shifted from practical to imbalanced. "I'd like to open new accounts," I informed the banker, a sharp-eyed woman who recognized the decisiveness in my request. She guided me through the process efficiently. I transferred exactly half of our joint savings into my new personal account. Not a penny more or less, fair but firm. I established automatic transfers for my share of household expenses into the joint account, but the rest of my income would now be mine to manage. "Will your wife be joining us to sign the paperwork for the changes to the joint account?" the banker asked. "No," I replied simply. "I'm only authorized to make decisions about my own finances going forward." The banker nodded with professional neutrality, but I caught the flash of understanding in her eyes. She'd seen this scenario before. My second appointment of the morning was with the headhunter. Over coffee in a sleek downtown office, he laid out 3 potential opportunities, all offering substantial increases in both responsibility and compensation. "You're undervalued in your current position," he stated bluntly. "Companies are looking for decisive leadership, and that's the energy you're projecting now." I didn't commit to any specific opportunity, but I authorized him to put my name forward for all 3. Back at the office, I found an unexpected email from the VP following our conversation yesterday. He was fast-tracking the leadership position and wanted me to interview next week. Attached was compensation information that made my recent banking changes even more timely. During lunch, I made a decision I'd been contemplating for days. Change number 12, creating physical distance. I called a high-end hotel downtown and booked their executive suite for 3 nights. "Will this be for business or pleasure, sir?" the reservation clerk asked. "Personal development," I replied, surprising myself with the answer but recognizing its truth. Next, I called a travel agent, an old-school move in the digital age, but I wanted expertise for what I had in mind. "I need a solo adventure," I explained. "Something challenging but rewarding. Week after next." She asked insightful questions about my interests and comfort levels before suggesting several options. I settled on a hiking expedition through rugged mountain terrain, physically demanding and far outside my previous comfort zone. "This isn't a typical vacation package," she warned. "It's intense." "Perfect," I responded. "Deposit the full amount from this card." That evening, I packed a suitcase methodically while she watched from the doorway, her silence now stemming from confusion rather than control. "Where are you going?" she finally asked, arms crossed defensively. "I've booked a hotel for a few nights," I explained without pausing my packing. "I need space to think." The deliberate echo of her earlier excuse wasn't lost on her. "You're leaving? Just like that?" I zipped the suitcase closed before turning to face her. "I'm not leaving our marriage. I'm taking time to focus completely on myself without distraction. There's a difference. This is about punishing me for not talking to you." I shook my head, maintaining eye contact. "That's the fundamental mistake you've been making all along, assuming my actions revolve around you." Her expression flickered between anger and uncertainty. "When will you be back?" "When I'm ready," I said, lifting my suitcase. "But there's something you should know before I go." I explained the banking changes I'd made, being clear about the fair division and continued contribution to household expenses. Her face paled slightly. "You had no right to do that without discussing it with me," she protested. "Just like you had no right to freeze me out for 9 days without discussion," I countered calmly. "We're establishing new patterns here, aren't we?" As I moved toward the door, she followed, her composure cracking further. "This isn't you," she insisted. "You don't do things like this." I paused, looking back at her with a slight smile. "That's where you're wrong. This is exactly who I am now. The question is whether you're interested in getting to know this version of me. I loaded my suitcase into the car as the sun set on day 9. Through the window, I could see her watching, phone pressed to her ear, likely calling a friend for support or advice. The script had been completely flipped. Now she was the one feeling abandoned and confused. The hotel suite was spacious and impersonal, the perfect environment for my final transformation. After settling in, I went to the hotel bar for dinner, sitting alone but not lonely. The bartender was attentive, and several other guests nodded respectfully, as business travelers often do. A woman at the end of the bar caught my eye and raised her glass slightly in acknowledgement. In another life, the life before my 10-day metamorphosis, I would have awkwardly looked away. Tonight, I returned the gesture confidently. She made her way over during my second drink, introducing herself as a corporate lawyer in town for a case. Our conversation flowed easily, intellectually stimulating without crossing any lines. When she suggested continuing the conversation over dinner, I was direct. I'm married, I stated simply. Currently complicated, but still married. She appreciated the honesty, and we parted with mutual respect rather than awkwardness. The interaction was meaningful, not for what it might have led to, but for what it represented. I was being seen differently by the world because I was seeing myself differently. In my suite, I called the front desk and arranged for a wake-up call and breakfast delivery for 5 a.m. Tomorrow would be day 10, the final day of her silent treatment according to my mental countdown and the completion of my transformation. Change number 13 would be the most significant yet, redefining not just how I appeared or behaved, but the fundamental nature of our relationship. The old me had disappeared a little more each day, replaced by someone stronger, more confident, and far less willing to accept less than he deserved. As I drifted toward sleep in the unfamiliar bed, I realized I was no longer angry about her silent treatment. In fact, I was almost grateful. Without that catalyst, I might have continued fading into the background of my own life indefinitely. Day 9 closed with an unexpected sense of peace. Whatever happened tomorrow, I was prepared to face it as my authentic self, perhaps for the first time in years. Day 10 dawned with purpose. The wake-up call came precisely at 5 a.m., followed shortly by room service delivering a protein-rich breakfast. I ate while reviewing the previous 9 days in my journal, documenting each change and its impact not just on my circumstances but on my self-perception. The transformation had been comprehensive: physical appearance, career trajectory, social connections, financial structure, living arrangements. But the most crucial element remained, the 13th and final change that would redefine the fundamental dynamics of my marriage. Change number 13, relationship recalibration. I dressed in one of my new suits, a deep navy that projected both authority and approachability. The morning ritual of grooming had become almost meditative, each action deliberate, focused on presenting my most confident self to the world. My phone had accumulated several missed calls and messages overnight, all from her. The progression was telling, irritation giving way to confusion, then concern, and finally a hint of panic. The final message, sent at 3:17 a.m., simply read, "Please come home, we need to talk." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I called my office and arranged to work remotely for the day. Then I contacted a realtor recommended by the hotel concierge and scheduled a viewing of 3 rental properties that afternoon, not as escape routes, but as options. Having alternatives was a form of power I'd neglected for too long. Only then did I text her back, "We'll be home this evening, 7 p.m. Her response came instantly, "I'll be waiting. Please, let's fix this." The shift was remarkable. After 10 days of her calculated silence, she was now the one anxiously seeking communication. The power dynamics had completely reversed. I spent the morning working productively from the hotel business center, focusing on the executive presentation I'd be delivering next week. At lunch, I met with a financial advisor to discuss investment strategies for my newly independent finances, another step toward long-term self-sufficiency. The property viewings were educational. I had no immediate plans to move out permanently, but understanding the market and seeing tangible alternatives changed my perspective on our shared home. It was a preference now, not a necessity. At precisely 6:58 p.m., I pulled into our driveway. The house lights were on, and through the window, I could see she had prepared dinner. An elaborate meal, judging by the dining room setup visible from outside, a transparent attempt to re-establish domestic normalcy. I entered without announcing myself. She emerged from the kitchen immediately, her appearance carefully curated, hair styled, makeup fresh, wearing the dress I'd once mentioned liking. The effort was obvious and, in its way, revealing. "You're home," she said, relief evident in her voice. "I've been so worried." I set down my briefcase calmly. "No need. I informed you of my plans. After you'd already made them," she countered, then seemed to catch herself. "But that doesn't matter. Now I'm just glad you're here. Dinner's almost ready." "Before we eat," I said, remaining standing, "I think we need to address the situation directly." She nodded quickly, gesturing toward the living room. "Yes, absolutely. I know my silence was immature. I shouldn't have handled things that way." We sat across from each other, me in an armchair, her on the couch. The physical arrangement was deliberate on my part, avoiding the artificial intimacy of sitting side by side. "Why did you do it?" I asked directly. 10 days of complete silence. "I want to understand the thinking behind that strategy." She looked down, then back up with what appeared to be practiced remorse. "I was testing you, testing us, seeing if you'd fight for my attention, for our relationship." "Testing," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. Without my knowledge or consent, without establishing parameters or purpose, just unilateral psychological manipulation. She flinched slightly at the characterization. "When you put it that way, it sounds terrible. Because it is," I stated simply. "It's emotional abuse." "Actually, if I had done the same to you, what would you have called it?" The question clearly caught her off guard. In our previous relationship dynamic, I would never have labeled her behavior so directly. "I was frustrated with how things were between us," she attempted to explain. "You seemed so complacent, so accepting of the status quo. I wanted to shake things up." "Mission accomplished," I replied with a slight smile, though perhaps not in the way you anticipated. She leaned forward. "These changes you've been making, the clothes, the attitude, the separate finances, is this all to get back at me? That's the fundamental misunderstanding you've been operating under," I said, leaning back comfortably. "This isn't about you. It never was. Your silence simply created the space for me to see how much I'd compromised my authentic self for the sake of domestic harmony." "So, what happens now?" she asked, vulnerability finally breaking through her composed facade. "Are you leaving me?" "That depends entirely on you," I replied. "Honestly, I have no interest in continuing a relationship where power games and manipulation are the primary forms of communication. The man you married might have tolerated that indefinitely. The man sitting before you won't." "What are you saying exactly?" "I'm saying the old relationship is over," I stated clearly. "Whether we build a new one depends on mutual respect, direct communication, and genuine partnership, not tests, not silent treatment, not emotional manipulation." She was quiet for a moment, processing this fundamental shift. "And if I can't accept these changes, then we'll part ways amicably," I responded without hesitation. "I've spent this week reconnecting with who I truly am and who I want to become. I won't compromise that again, not even for our marriage." Tears formed in her eyes, genuine ones this time, not the calculated displays I'd grown accustomed to. "I don't want to lose you." "Then don't try to control me," I replied simply. "Love the man I am, not the version you thought you could shape through manipulation." She nodded slowly, wiping away tears. "These past 10 days I've never seen you like this, so confident, so certain." "Neither had I acknowledged. "Which makes your test perhaps the most valuable gift you've ever given me, though that wasn't your intention. A moment of understanding passed between us, a recognition that whatever came next would be fundamentally different from what had come before." "Dinner's getting cold," she said finally. "Will you eat with me? Just talk." "I will," I agreed, standing. "But first I need your commitment. No more silent treatment, no more tests. If you have concerns, you voice them directly. Can you agree to that?" "Yes," she said softly, "I can." Over dinner, we talked more openly than we had in years. She admitted the silent treatment had been a tactic suggested by a friend, one she regretted implementing almost immediately but had been too proud to abandon. I shared the specific changes I'd made and why each mattered to me. "You seem happier," she observed as we finished eating, "more alive somehow." "I am," I confirmed. "The question is whether we can build a relationship where I stay this way, where we both thrive as our authentic selves rather than diminished versions designed not to threaten the other." "I'd like to try," she said, meeting my eyes directly, "if you'll give me the chance." I considered her request carefully. "I will, on one condition: we start fresh, equal partners with equal say, equal respect, and equal responsibility for direct communication." She nodded, extending her hand across the table in a gesture that was both conciliatory and symbolic. "Deal." I took her hand, but my expression remained serious. "Understand this. If we're starting over, we're doing it my way this time. No games, no tests, no manipulation. One incident like this, 10-day silence, and I'm gone permanently. She swallowed hard but nodded again. I understand, and I respect it. That night we slept in the same bed for the first time in over a week. Though we didn't make love, that would come when trust was rebuilt, not as a quick fix for deeper issues. As I drifted towards sleep, I reflected on the 13 changes that had transformed not just my appearance or daily habits, but my fundamental understanding of myself. What had begun as a reaction to her silent treatment had evolved into a complete reinvention, one I would have never undertaken without that catalyzing rejection. In the darkness, I smiled slightly. Sometimes the worst things that happen to you lead to the best version of yourself. Her silence had been meant to diminish me, to make me desperate for her approval and attention. Instead, it had awakened something dormant, a man who knew his worth and wouldn't settle for less than he deserved. Day 10 had arrived with uncertainty and ended with clarity. Whatever happened next in our marriage, one thing was certain: I would never be invisible again. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.